I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. To share a little bit about myself, I've had to overcome some of life's greatest challenges, including childhood trauma, addiction, and chronic illness. After experiencing deeper healing, it's my passion and purpose to help other people in the recovery community like you experience the same. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to let you know about my passion and purpose in the form of service, and that's my work as an integrative recovery coach. I offer my service in the form of a one-on-one coaching program called Healing Beyond Recovery. You can learn more about me and my services on my webpage at www.mikegovoni.com. There you can also sign up to receive my bi-weekly vlog by entering your email address. Now, to introduce today's guest of the show, Kevin Griffin. Kevin is a personal friend and mentor on the path of meditation and recovery. Kevin is best known as the author of One Breath at a Time, Buddhism in the 12 Steps. He has published 5 books and soon to be 6. He is a longtime Buddhist practitioner and 12-step participant. He is a leader in the mindful recovery movement and is one of the founders of the Buddhist Recovery Network. He specializes in helping people in recovery connect with meditation and a progressive understanding of the 12 steps. I'm personally grateful for Kevin in having crossed paths with him and get to know him and learn from him. And without further ado, let's welcome Kevin to the show. Welcome, Kevin, to the show. I'm so excited to be talking with you today. Kevin is not only someone I look up to in regards to his work, his books, but also as a friend and a mentor of a program that I'm actually in right now. So I'm beginning to create a deeper relationship and getting to know you on a different level, which is super exciting. But really, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. It's really an honor.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Mike. It's great.
Of course. So I'm just thinking about where to dive in here. There's so many different nuggets I could take from the books you've
Mm.
read and from getting to know and work with you for the last year or so. But I think we should start with something that really fascinates me about you is that you started meditating and got into the teachings of the Buddha before you got sober. How did that happen?
Well, how did that happen? You know, I, I always felt that I was on a spiritual journey before I got sober, and really, so so I think drinking and using was, I call it like a misguided attempt at a spiritual experience, you know, and when the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous even explicitly points to that connection between, I think it's the uh, sorry, the, the shrink. Um, anyway, it says spiritus and spiritual, or that alcohol as spirits shows a connection between spirituality and intoxication. Um, and so I, I, and I was a musician, and music to me was always a spiritual thing too. But you know, being spiritual involves also a discipline, and that's what I didn't have until I really got sober and started to live the practice. But I mean, one of the things I've seen, I've been teaching and working with people in recovery for over 20 years, and it surprised me to see how many people I've met along the way also had some kind of spiritual life before they got sober. and again, it would often be sort of misguided, and it might be a cult
Hmm.
or sort of magical thinking in some way. But I do think that addicts are searching for something.
Hmm.
That we kind of searched the wrong way. We fell off the cliff
Hmm.
in that search. But but I think we are searching for something, and so I think that's one of the reasons why people really respond to my work connecting Buddhism and the 12 steps, because they've always been searching for something,
Yeah.
and they get sober and they're like still searching, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's what's great about recovery. People in recovery don't just like, okay, I'm done. It's like it's an ongoing process.
Oh,
So I think it's all part of the search.
absolutely. And you're so speaking my language, because I am definitely a seeker. And on page 226 of your book that we're going to be touching in and out of, called One Breath at a Time, you say the thirst for alcoholic, in parentheses, spirits, can be turned toward reaching a higher spirit. So it's so interesting. When I saw that line, I was like, oh, that's awesome, because I'm such a seeker. And even after I put drugs and alcohol down 16 plus years ago, I'm
Mm.
still seeking. But what I'm really curious
Yeah.
about is, did you really meditate?
Oh yeah.
That's fascinating, because
Yeah.
I couldn't get into meditation until I was forced to. But here you are seeking even before you got into recovery, and you're meditating. What did you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was, you could call me a periodic alcoholic.
Mhm.
Um, and um, so my binging and my blackouts and all that, I wasn't like a fifth of vodka a day drinker. I was somebody who would, drink regularly, and then I would binge periodically. But I was a daily marijuana smoker. And actually, I started cutting back on marijuana when I learned TM, which was before I got into Buddhism. So
Oh.
to take TM, you have to stop smoking pot for 2 weeks, which was really a challenge for me. I mean, really, it took me several years. I wanted to learn it, but it was several years that I waited to do it because I just couldn't face that 2 weeks. So I stopped smoking pot for 2 weeks, and then I didn't really pick it up as a daily thing again. It was periodic.
Hmm. And for those who don't know, what's TM? Transcendental meditation. It's.
Yeah, TM, Transcendental Meditation. It's basically a Hindu form of meditation where you repeat a mantra to yourself. Um, it was what the Beatles did. And
Hmm.
it's very popular, and it's a very legitimate form of practice. Because I was still drinking and using, there wasn't sort of a teaching to go along with it. When I encountered Buddhism, I really liked the fact that it wasn't just a meditation, but it was a whole philosophy and understanding of reality that helped me to understand my life.
Yeah, and in transcendental meditation, you basically get a mantra, and then you practice that. For the listeners that aren't sure or don't know what TM is, I started. It's so interesting now that we're having this conversation. I've always been seeking as a child. I always believed in the angels and all that sort of stuff. And then I got into meditation from TM2. So here you are practicing TM, and then you got into the Buddhist teachings and
Right.
practice.
And, and that was all part of my alcoholism, in that I was doing TM and I was dating a woman who was doing Buddhist meditation. And I was afraid I was losing her. Uh, and so I decided, one of the reasons I was losing her was because, I was drinking really heavily, and we had I got really drunk one night. We had a terrible fight. So the next day I was like, oh, the solution to this is go to learn Buddhist meditation. Wasn't, stop drinking. And so I started doing Buddhist meditation, and then I encountered Joseph Goldstein's book, The Experience of Insight,
Hmm.
and I started to hear about meditation retreats, and they sounded really intriguing to me. And again, I sort of thought like, they're going to fix me,
Oh
you know.
wow.
And that was a lot. And my first year of practice, I went at it. I was talking about this on my in my class today. That uh, my first year after I learned Buddhist meditation, I spent 4 months on silent retreat.
Really?
So it was just like off the wall. Yeah. And at the end of that, I didn't have a nervous breakdown, but I was completely lost. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. I wound up then abandoning the whole thing and following this like new age guru who was homeless. And it's all in my book. But anyway, he was homeless, and I was living on faith. I was actually, I was in Boston at that time, and I met him in Boston. I was working at a Red Wing bookstore, and I met him, and then I just left my job, left my home, again, just threw everything away, went off, and I wound up homeless, living in Venice Beach in California,
And
and
you
started like sleeping in people's vans and stuff.
and you
You
weren't
know.
sober at the time, or you were still
Oh
drinking?
no, 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 no. I was not
Yeah.
sober at the time, and yeah. So this is like in the course of 1 year, I've gone on like 4 months of meditation retreats, and then thrown that all away, like gone in another direction because this guy was like a, you know, just wacky kind of almost like a cult leader, but he didn't have a cult. It
Hmm.
was like me and three other people. It was pitiful. And I was really lost. I mean, that was truly my life bottom, was that in the summer of 1982. But I didn't get sober for 3 years after that. And I characterize that as I was below my bottom. I had to get up to the point where had to get off the street, because when you're homeless, like you almost need alcohol and
Hmm.
drugs.
Yeah.
It's the idea of getting sober and clean and being homeless. It doesn't really work. It's too miserable. So it took me 3 years just to put my life together enough that I had a job and a place to live again, and I could function enough to like actually realize that, wow, drugs and alcohol are really crippling me. Yeah, it was a
I-
rough 5 years.
And
Oof,
and
when I think about it, it was 5 years.
and what was that pivotal moment where you were like, I need to get my things in line here and straighten up?
When I decided to get sober, it was, I think, as it is with many people, there was sort of a progression toward it. It started about 6 months before, when the girlfriend I had then, uh, and there always seems to be a girlfriend involved in my life, in the different moments of my life, I realized. But she like went to an AA meeting, and she came home with the 20 questions, like that are supposed to help you determine if you have a problem. And I took them, and by the way they define an alcoholic, I had a problem. I was an alcoholic. And of course, what I did was say, oh well, I can control it. So then, I just went on another like 6 month binge, really, where I started out. I stopped drinking for like a week, right? And like then just started drinking and doing coke, and it was just ugly. Uh, and at the end of that, it ended when I was in a band. Is um, that was that was my job. I was playing music for a living, and we were had a I had sunk into like the worst gig I'd ever had in my life, and we got fired. And the fact that I got fired from the worst gig I had in my life, just it was finally like the slap in the face that I needed.
Hmm.
And I just woke up that next morning, and it was over. I mean, I can't explain it, and I don't believe in a God that intervenes in your life, But if I did, that would be a moment that I would point to where it didn't seem like I had really. I must have been thinking about it. I mean, I know I'd been thinking about it because I found a journal from a year before, uh, a while back, or where I was talking about trying to control my drinking, and realized that it'd been on my mind for a long time. But somehow that moment happened, and I've been blessed because I never wanted to drink again. It was just,
Wow.
for some of us, that's the way it is. It just was over. I didn't go to rehab or anything. I started to go to meetings, but I wasn't even really involved. I wasn't really ready to be like part of a, program. Wasn't really, the type of thing I would do,
Yeah.
It took
Mm.
me a while to realize I had to change a lot more than just stop drinking. That was just the beginning. As you know, I mean, that didn't solve much. It just made it possible for me to solve other problems.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the way I talk at treatment centers. When people say, "Oh, well, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic," I tell them, "Look, who cares if you're an alcoholic or not? When you're drinking and using, your life isn't working. And when if you stop drinking and using, you might be able to make it work.
Yeah.
But as long as you're drinking and using, you're not going to be able to solve problems.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to when I got first when I first got sober. I reached out and saw a good friend, Brad, and I was like, Brad, yeah, I know I have a problem with drugs, but I don't think I'm an alcoholic. And he's like, man, just show up for like, 90 days, do 90 and 90, and then make the decision when you're done. And lo and behold, I did, just because I was in enough pain, and I realized, wow, like I have this thing. Let's just put it this way: when I know I drink booze, I lose my spiritual values, and I
Yeah,
do other things. So, wow, you had an act of grace, kind of, whatever you want to call it. And Kevin, let's
yeah,
fast forward just a little bit, because there's so many parts to this that I want to touch upon. Here you are.
yeah.
When was that? How many years ago?
That's 35 years ago.
35 years ago. And
June of 1985.
June of 85. All right. So, for the listeners, I was 3 years old when Kevin got sober.
Right.
So we're not going to update him, but now Kevin travels around and he's a Dharma teacher. He teaches the teachings of the Buddha. He's an author of a few wonderful books here that I have in front of me, actually, and helping a lot of people. How did you get to the place where you are now, where Buddhism has been like,
Mm.
a foundation for you to grow and evolve on a spiritual journey?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that because it's something I reflect on from time to time, how strange life is, that choices we make and things we do, if you live long enough, sometimes they all come together. And what happened was that after I got sober, I just worked the steps for a while. I was still like doing some Buddhist practice, but it was kind of on the back burner. But after once I got to about 6 years sober, it was around when I moved to Northern California to finish school at UC Berkeley. I started to realize that I needed to. I got more. I was getting back into Buddhism and really realizing how important that was to me, and that what I had learned a decade earlier really stuck with me and still inspired me. And so I started to really think seriously: is there some way to connect Buddhism and the 12 steps?
Hmm.
And that took, that was just something I reflected on, and I and so at the same time I was in one of my teachers invited me to lead a little uh, or co-lead a little sort of meditation support group. So that was my first like dipping my toes into kind of having leadership, and then the years go by. At that point, I go through finish graduate school then in the mid '90s, and I at that point then I was really back into Buddhism. I was going on retreats every year, uh, reading and studying, and I got invited into a teacher training program in 1997. And and so then I just started, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of groups and stuff, and I would lead different groups, and I had some little groups at my house. Um, but all along, I had also, when I went back to school, I started studying writing, and I tried to write uh, fiction. Wrote a couple of novels and went to graduate school in creative writing. So I started to get this idea that, oh, maybe I can do a book about Buddhism and the 12 steps.
Mhm.
And then around 2002, I got laid off from a job, and my wife, who's an English professor, said, "Why don't you think of this as uh, a sabbatical,
A
uh,
sign.
and go on your unemployment for a while and write the book proposal, write a couple chapters." And so I did that, and that all just kind of, it was good timing. I think it was a time when people were just starting to really get into mindfulness, and Buddhism was becoming more popular, and many things I've tried to do in my life have not succeeded. I've I'd say I've failed a lot of times, although I don't think of it that way.
Hmm.
But a lot of things have not wound up the way I wanted them to be. I have a musical career, and I didn't become a rock star, and I had a writing career, and I didn't sell a novel. I didn't become a novelist. But this thing, and a lot of those times it felt like I was banging my head against the wall, like
Yeah.
like I want to do this, but the universe is not interested.
Mm.
And with this, it was like the universe was interested, and it was like everything just fell into place. Uh, I got an agent right away. The agent sold the book right away. As soon as the book came out, people started to invite me all over the country to teach. I've traveled, you know, far and wide across the states, Canada, Mexico, Ireland, England, teaching. I could go to many other places. I just don't like to travel that much. But
Mm.
I'm just saying, it's like when you land on the thing that you're supposed to do, it just kind of it happens.
The
And
doors open up for you.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'd rather be a rock star, but
Uh-huh.
this is okay.
Well, you're a damn good author, and you've helped a lot of people out, including myself. Yeah, so it's beautiful. It's such a kind of like a leap of faith, right? You take this sabbatical
Yeah,
and you start writing the manuscript there, and the agent comes along, and then before you know it, you have speaking gigs, and it's really a really beautiful story. Um, and it's inspiring to me because I'm the son of a born again Christian preacher. I came from a lot of dogmatic Christianity, and I never really resonated with that. And then through suffering, it opened me up to the teachings of the Buddha. Not because I was like, oh, I want to go study Buddhism, but I was in such a deep, dark place that I started YouTubing probably suffering and how to alleviate suffering. And I stumbled across the Vietnamese Buddhist Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and he had all these wonderful videos about suffering. And
mm,
he said, when you learn how to suffer, you suffer less. And I started, listening to him, and his teachings just sat right on my heart.
mm,
And I started practicing meditation. And at that time, I had a health problem where I was reacting to smells. I had multiple chemical sensitivity,
uh,
and I was suffering so deeply. And this monk, his words and his voice were like, um, they were so soothing, and I began to practice meditation to bring down the hyperarousal of the reaction from the smells. And in doing so, I had a profound shift in consciousness that opened the doors for me to the teachings of the Buddha. So let's get into that a little bit, if you don't mind, in regards to most people who are listening to this podcast are in recovery and probably still suffering. And, um, you know, not feeling that sense of serenity and peace that you specifically talk about here on page 225 in relationship to step
Mhm.
11. So I got sober in AA, but step 11 sought through prayer meditation. I almost said medication. I just kind of blew right by that. And I wasn't sitting, that's
Yeah.
for sure, until the pain got great enough. So you say here, step 11 leads us directly into the fullness of spiritual life. It shows us a direct line between our spiritual practices and our connection with ultimate truth. Once we've weathered the storms of inventory and amends, this step leads us to a safe harbor where we begin to live the promises of peace and serenity. So maybe we can touch upon and speak to the people that have been in 12 step, doing the steps, but really not experiencing that peace and serenity. And how can meditation, the teachings of the Buddha, if we want to go there, maybe help alleviate their suffering? And what does that look like? Let's just jump in there for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a critical question, and really one of the main motivations for me writing that book and doing the work that I do, which is my recognition early on that although I had a background in meditation when I came to the 12 steps, many people who come to the program, just like you, as you said, don't develop a meditation practice. And to me, it's like they're just cutting off the what the potential of recovery right when it's about to get good,
Oh my
Not that
God,
it's
yes.
it's it's all good, but the promises and the promise that we're going to have serenity and peace. Um, yeah, I mean, sure, you get some of that from working the first 10 steps, but step 11 is the one in which you actually address directly your nervous system, right? I mean, to put it in those sort of practical terms.
Well, hold on. It 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 directly addresses our nervous system. Now, I know we've had some conversations in our mentoring group about trauma, and I work as a
Yeah,
trauma informed recovery coach. So this is like music to my ears. So speak a little bit more
yeah,
about how that addresses the nervous system, if you could.
right. So it's not magic, right? It's very intentional. The mindfulness meditation, which is the foundation of Buddhist meditation, teaches us to look at our body, our physical experience, look at our mental experience, our thought life, look at our emotional experience, our felt experience, and to start to uh, first of all understand and question what's going on in the mind, see how it connects to the body and creates stress and, yeah, trauma, to
Mm-hmm.
so- and then shows us only, and it doesn't show us intellectually, it shows us through a felt experience. We learn how to release tension, stress in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think a lot of people miss that when they're first trying to learn meditation. They think, oh, I'm supposed to stop thinking. But that's not what we're doing. We're trying to look into that and start to see the connections between body, mind, emotions, and our belief systems, and all of that that's creating, you know, a whole physiological response
Response.
in the
Yeah.
body. And so when we interrupt that process over and over, when we stop the stress making thoughts, when we relax the tension in the body, when we do these things over and over and these become habitual ways of operating, then there's this decrease in that, in those negative states. And there's a healing that happens. And yeah, so it's a very much a physiological process that goes on through this uh, intentional engagement with our experience.
Yes, it's a very much embodied practice in way
Yeah,
of being. And for some of the listeners out there, if you're like, yeah, but when I sit still, my mind is rambunctious, my body, we get it. We were there too. And
yeah,
you're talking to a
yeah.
guy right here that I was, I would jump on my road bike and ride 40 miles not to feel a sensation. I would be in the gym twice a day building up my armor on my body so you wouldn't get close to my heart.
Hmm.
And now, I was working with the practice that brought me to home to myself. And in the beginning, it's difficult because everything is stored there. So, like Kevin said, the object isn't to stop the mind, it's to begin to work with what is present and see it
Yeah,
clearly so we can allow our own wisdom and discernment that's underneath the neurosis, let's just say, so we can
yeah.
begin to shift that. Now, when we get into that aspect, it's almost the karma, because now when we can be with
Hmm.
things in a new way, we're not so reactionary in that conditioned response.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is a practice, and this is again a critical idea for people to understand, that you don't go to the gym once and become muscle bound. That
Yes,
if you're going to get in
yes.
shape, if you're going to learn any skill. I mean, I remember I learned to type when I was like 3 years sober. And again, it's one of those things. You just sit there. You start out, and it's like, this is impossible. Like, there's all these letters. You're like, and you just click, 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 and gradually your body learns, right? The muscle memory, and there's meditation is very much like a muscle memory, something that we do regularly every day. And if you get serious about it, you go on retreats, and you do multiple times a day for hours, and sort of applying mindfulness throughout your day, and this becomes a muscle memory that then becomes quite natural. And interestingly enough, those even those disturbing and like the thoughts, the spinning out thoughts, they don't even bother you as much. They might even show up, but they don't have the same pull on you anymore, because that's why I mentioned our belief system, because part of our problem is not just that we're having the thoughts, but that we're believing them, that we're believing their fundamental basis. Like when I'm having that, like, oh, I'm such an asshole kind of thought,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, if I don't believe that, it's really not a problem. It's okay, all right, I have the thought, sometimes I act like an asshole. I might say that was a stupid thing to do, but that doesn't mean I'm a stupid person. That
Mm.
kind of just our belief system. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a whole shift, a huge shift that can happen. And with that, coming back to recovery and the point of the 12 steps, the first 10 steps are this tremendous foundation. One of the reasons I love working with people in recovery and teaching them meditation is that when you've taken inventory, when you've learned to turn things over, and when you have been made amends, there's a really great foundation for going deeper into spiritual practice. People who come to spiritual practice without having done that stuff, it's a rockier road for them,
Mm.
because you get into meditation and all of a sudden your inventory shows up,
Mm.
and if you've never done inventory, you can get overwhelmed by it. So the
Yeah.
steps are a great foundation. And in Buddhist tradition, you're supposed to do the the ethical work and lay the foundation before you do meditation. You're supposed to develop these ethical qualities and following precepts to not harm people, and all the behavioral things before you meditate. In the West, we get it backwards. We think you should meditate first, and then after we meditate for a while, we realize, oh, like, I kind of need to check out how I'm behaving, because every time I sit down to meditate, I start thinking about all the bad things I've done.
Yeah. Yes. So what Kevin's sharing about there is the precepts that's known in Buddhism, and it's these ethical guidelines that we live by. And let's just face it, if you're living not in an appropriate way and harming others, and you sit with yourself, all that stuff's going to come up and be very difficult for you to be with. So he's sharing that we find some sort of template or you know precepts really to adhere to, which in Buddhism, I don't think I'll get them all, but we don't take intoxicants that hinder our consciousness. We don't have sex out of relationship. We don't steal. And help me out.
Don't lie and don't kill.
Yeah, don't lie and don't kill. So if you can follow that, if you can follow that guideline, and then start your practice, it may be a little less rocky, but nonetheless, Kevin was talking about, not clinging to what shows up when we sit and in general our thoughts. So I'll meet so many people in the recovery community that are like, yeah, the inner critic is driving me nuts. The thinking, the shitty committee, right? You hear that a lot in 12 step. Well, the shitty committee becomes really workable when you begin to practice meditation. It almost doesn't even touch you eventually.
Yeah.
Would you say that's correct?
No, it's yeah. I think your relationship really changes to that.
Yeah.
You don't have the same relationship because it just doesn't. I mean, you know, one of the sort of core teachings of Buddhism is that sort of what we call self is kind of a construction. And you see that when you meditate a lot. You start to see how your thoughts are just something that they don't, they're not, they're not true. They don't hold any absolute truth in them. For one thing, you'll notice you'll have contradictory thoughts. One day you'll think one thing, the next day you'll think the opposite. So you start to realize, well, they're just sort of these random, you know, like things that are randomly generated by my nervous system. Is kind of the way it seems, and by my consciousness or my subconscious. So yeah, they kind of lose power when it's like when you uh, I'm trying to think like when a little kid who's just making up a story or something. You don't believe that, right?
Mm.
It's or maybe it's like when we think of how we when we believed in Santa Claus or something. It's like, okay, well that doesn't have any power for me anymore, you know, because I know it's just a fabrication. So when we start to see self or even thought as fabrication, and then it doesn't have much power. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm at a place where I'm just so enlightened that I don't believe any of my thoughts, but they certainly don't have nearly the power that they had when I was unconscious of them. And the other thing about becoming aware of thinking is that we're able to replace our thoughts. We're able to go, oh, no, wait, I'm not a bad person, or wait, maybe I shouldn't judge that person. What if I had a little compassion for them instead of being judgmental of them? And so we start to be able to have so that's what's called like seeing experience through the lens of Dharma.
Mm.
So normally we see our experience through the lens of self. It's about me and about my opinions and my views. But when we study a spiritual path, and in Buddhism, Dharma that's what we call the teachings of the Buddha, but it has the larger meaning, more general meaning of just truth. When we look at things through the lens of Dharma, well, that's looking at it with this broader perspective, where we're bringing compassion and love in, where we're bringing wisdom in, instead of, as you said, neurosis or self-centeredness, ego, judgment, resentments, all the stuff that's associated with the petty self, the small self.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're not seeing clearly, it's easy to fall into the construct of our thoughts, or this reality that's just kind of arises from the thinking mind with no consciousness, that's seeing it, and we can believe it. And
Oh yeah,
yeah, and it's for the listeners, it's really important to understand that this takes time and practice to cultivate that sense of non-reactionary place within us. It takes time, and through the practice, we begin to see clearer. We begin to see, with new eyes. I think, who says it? Einstein. We don't become, or Carl Jung. We don't become enlightened by imagining images of light, but by only making the darkness conscious. It's like all that
mm,
stuff is down there,
right.
but the practice allows us
Yep.
to be with it and see with new eyes. And over time, you know, like Kevin said, we build this different relationship to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hmm.
Well, and I think you're kind of getting at the fact that not unlike getting sober, the beginning stage can be very uncomfortable, you know, uh, because now you're seeing things that you've been avoiding seeing, uh, that you've been either in denial about or just weren't awake enough to see. And it's like doing your first inventory. You start to realize, oh God, like I'm carrying around all this junk in me. And the
Yeah.
first reaction, because this is the normal human reaction, is to judge ourselves some more. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
like I think there's one spiritual teacher who says something like, self-knowledge is always bad news.
Hmm.
You know, and it's like, oh no, now I'm seeing stuff. There's a reason I was drinking and using, because I didn't want to see this. I didn't want to feel it, right? That's the other thing. We start to feel more deeply.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, the practice, both the meditation practice as well as this shift into seeing things through the lens of Dharma, gives us this power. You know, this is kind of the higher power in my view, this power to hold the experience and to be with it without getting overwhelmed. And eventually the power of that mindfulness, the power of that wisdom, the power of the love, the self-compassion, that becomes strong enough so that we can, very safely open to the feelings, to the thoughts. We can see it, the and the power of the judgment, the power of the negativity is just weakened to the point, or maybe the power of the positivity is strengthened to the point, but it becomes a completely different experience. We're not overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think it's Ajahn Chah. He says, if you haven't begun to weep, you haven't begun to meditate. Because so
Mm.
much of that
Wow. Yeah.
stuff that we've been suppressing is under there. And something you said that really intrigues me is, opening up to that power that can see clearly or hold experience as it is. Um, which leads me back to the 11th step there, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious
Yeah.
contact with God. And I just want to speak from your book a little bit here, One Breath at a Time, when you share that you were on a Zen retreat, Zen in recovery, and you were talking about, um, they were going around and sharing amongst the group, and you commented after you've been meditating for a little while, your mind was really clear, and you said, for you, I think I can just say, sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact. You say, that's enough. And then you go
Yeah.
along to say, once I'm making contact, I'm there. I'm in tune with God's will. practicing meditation for me is trying to come into contact with what is. Maybe you can say a couple words about that.
Yeah. Yeah. My- it's I'm trying to get to something that's kind of simple, which because I think so often spirituality becomes turned into this exotic and complicated, maybe not complicated, but something sort of out of reach. And if we think about what what is God or what is spiritual, first of all, we have to realize that it can only be found in the present moment. It only makes sense that God can't be in the future or the past. I mean, any sense of, or maybe I should say, any experience of God or experience of spirit, it can only be felt in the present moment. So if I'm consciously contacting this present moment, then it seems like I'm there. You know, it's just sort of demystifying the process.
Yeah.
And and you know, now to really be there, to really have conscious contact, it means that your mind isn't being uh, clouded by what we greed, hatred, and delusion, the poisons the Buddha talks about. It's not clouded by self-centered thoughts or you know regrets or plans or fears. That so it it's not necessarily easy to get to that place. When I say I want to simplify it in a way, I don't mean it's easy, but that when that clarity comes with the work, with the practice, with the development of deeper mindfulness, deeper concentration, there is a sense of wholeness in that moment. Uh, that there's nothing else to attain then, that you're fully there in life. And so that to me feels like fulfillment of what the both the practice and the program are trying to get to. It's a spiritual awakening in in real time.
Yeah, exactly. In real time, it's a experience of the present
Yes.
moment. And I have to say this just because it coincides with this. And a lot of people come and you say this with the Lord's Prayer. Some people come with some religious trauma and such, in which I do. And, God can be a very triggering word. So the
Yeah.
experience of this, let's just say, you could say Christ consciousness, you could say Buddha nature, you could say Atman, whatever. There's really no word you can put on it, but it's there and it's in the present moment. And one of the most misunderstood saints of all time said, "Be still and know that I am God." And
Mhm.
the truth of what's in there, when that stillness and that mind settles, to see things clearly in the moment. And there's a profound sense of, like, you don't have to do anything. You can just be with it.
Yeah.
You can just be
Yeah.
with it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if we go back to some of the teachings a little bit in regards to the Buddha, he said that, craving is what causes the suffering, right?
Mhm.
Where the attachment to
Yeah.
trying to either push away what's unpleasant or grab towards what's pleasant. And for people in recovery, I know I did this for a long time, which was, I just switched seats. My
Mhm.
behavior, was erratic and irrational in other forms, exercise and chasing women, chasing money, chasing status, things of that nature. And until I
Right.
began to actually work with what was in me with meditation, I was always trying to grab on to something else or change the moment in some way. If it could only be like this. And through this practice of just resting in that stillness as you mentioned so beautifully, I'm just tuned in. I'm there. I'm in tune
Yeah.
with God's will. So that's
Yeah.
really profound.
Yeah, it's rich. And I agree just when you said that, about just the word God can be triggering for people. And I yeah, I use it. It has a particular meaning for me that it really just means sort of all that is. It kind of includes nature and the laws of nature, the law of karma. Um, it's not, but the thing is, in our language, in English, the word God is the name of someone, and it's very hard to purge that understanding from our consciousness to think, okay, God isn't someone, God is something, or God is everything, or however you characterize it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't want to, like, anybody who's listening to this, I don't want them to be like turned off because they think I'm talking about a guy up in the clouds wearing a
Yeah.
white robe and a long beard. It's not that at all. And so, the word God doesn't work for everybody, and which is fine. I just use it because to me it's shorthand, because it's really hard to like explain what I mean when I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
yes. And I'll second that. We're definitely not talking about some guy in the clouds. Rather, but accessing that state of consciousness within you, um, which can be so
yeah,
profound and can actually, I had an experience in meditation when I started practicing, and it's not anything that I did. It's just the arising of certain conditions gave birth to this mystical experience, and I didn't know what had happened, but it was very profound. And I went and sought after a teacher because I needed someone to help me. And she basically
mm,
told me that, you know, in Buddhism, there's like attainment, like you attain certain like levels of realization, let's just say. But rather than looking on the eyes of attainment, we actually lose old delusional ways of seeing. And that's what
mm,
happened through my own personal awakening and got me on the path of the Buddha in the Dharma. Was I had this experience where I got to see so crystal clear that I knew some of the ways I was living and behaving only led to more suffering.
yeah,
So in this clearly seeing this wisdom, right? And I'll repeat this quote from one of my favorite teachers, Yogananda, and I think it's totally appropriate because in the big book they use the word "Thy will be done" like over 13 times, I think. And Yogananda says, "Thy will be done" does not involve enslavement of man's will. A man's will is identical with God's wisdom guided will, since all wisdom is his alone. Now, once again, we're not going to some beard and a guy with a beard and a cloud, his, as far as his wisdom, but the wisdom that's within you, we have accessible. We can make that accessible through the practice of being still and resting and seeing clearly. And in doing so, it directly affects our life off the cushion, off the chair, whatever we're sitting on. And
yeah,
I know your work, Kevin, has been to, write these beautiful books and do, the work you do as a Dharma teacher and travel all around to really help people in recovery understand that, you can access this truth within you. And yes, I believe that there's something outside greater to all this as well. And through the practice of meditation and specifically the teachings of the Buddha, we can experience that freedom from suffering.
the bottom line is what it's
Yeah.
about.
And I know when I first started, well, first when I took a first step, if the step said, "Oh, you'll be relieved of freedom from suffering," oh, I would have definitely took it. And, and the same thing with when I was in really in deep pain and I started practicing meditation, I heard, oh, these are the teachings to alleviate suffering. So if you're on the other end listening to this podcast and you're in pain and you're suffering, there's a way out. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says, the way out is in. And that's been my experience. And I think it's been yours from what you share and what you teach and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to face it.
Yeah, we have to face it. And what is it? The pain, really.
Yeah, that's the starting point, right? It's the starting point of recovery. It's how we get into recovery, not by avoiding our pain, but by facing it and then seeing what's behind it. And it's the same thing you're describing, seeing what's behind your mental suffering is the same thing as seeing what's behind our addictive suffering. It's all about grasping. It's all about letting go.
Yeah. This is a journey. This is a practice. This is something that, it takes time to unfold. And if what we're speaking about today resonates with you, just honor that. And if not, that's okay too. And realize that, we all have this accessibility to this wisdom inside. And it requires, getting quiet and going within and really listening to ourselves in a more deeper way. And you'll be surprised with what is in there. And, by the practice can shine a little light on it for things to kind of, like Kevin said, to let go, to, get some movement. So can you just share a little bit about, your books and where people can find you? And I know you have a retreat coming on that I actually may attend in, I believe, October. Hopefully we're out of COVID by then. Maybe just tell them where they can find you.
Yeah. Well, my website is kevingriffin.net, so that's pretty easy to find. And on there I have links to all my books. There are 5 of them now. I'm working on number 6. Number 6 is called Buddhism and the 12 Steps Daily Reflections.
Awesome.
So it's 366 different teachings. So there will be one for every day of the year plus leap year. And that should be out this year. But yeah, all my teaching schedule is on my website. And right now I've got some classes that I'm doing online during the pandemic. I have some Zoom classes that are open, people can join. So, and if you can join my mailing list from the website as well. And you can contact me as well. You can email me from there.
Awesome. I'm so excited for your 6th book to come out, the 366 reflections and daily quotes. It's those books are great. I find those books to be like great gifts to give people that they can just reflect a page a day. So that's really great. I look forward to reading that myself, Kevin. And it's been a wonderful conversation with you. I'm grateful for everything that you've done. I'm grateful for you as one of my mentors today in my own teacher training program. And yeah, it's a journey. And
yeah, no, it's great to talk with you, Mike. I really appreciate what you're doing here with the podcast. It's terrific, and I appreciate all the questions and the chance to talk to people. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks again, Kevin. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to today's episode. It really means a lot to me that you are here today. So that you don't miss future episodes, please remember to subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms. And to learn more about Kevin and his work, including his books, go to my website at www.mikegovoni.com. Also, be on the lookout for episode numero 4, number 4, Healing with Sacred Plants. I'll be interviewing the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation, Carlos Tanner from Iquitos, Peru. Carlos and I will be talking about using the traditional Amazonian plant ayahuasca to experience deeper healing from trauma and addiction. It's going to be epic, so you'll definitely want to tune into that. And before I leave you, I have a favor to ask. If you liked today's episode, kindly leave a review and please tell someone else you know about the show. I really appreciate you passing on this message, and remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be. Until next time, happy healing and be well.